Now Sarai, Abraham's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Abram, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her." Abraham agreed to what Sarai said. So after Abram had been living in Canaan for 10 years, Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian slave Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. He slept with Hagar, and she conceived. When she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. Then Sarai said to Abram, "You are responsible for the wrong I am suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and now she knows that she's pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me." Your slave is in your hands," Abraham said. "Do with her whatever you think best." Then Sarai ill-treated Hagar, so she fled from her. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. And he said, "Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from, and where are you going?" "I'm running away from my mistress, Sarai," she answered. Then the angel of the Lord told her, "Go back to your mistress and submit to her." The angel added, "I will increase your descendants so much that you will be too numerous to count." The angel of the Lord also said to her, "You are now pregnant, and you will give birth to a son. You shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hands against him. And he will live in a hostility towards all of his brothers." She gave this name to the Lord, who spoke to her, "You are the God who sees me." For she said, I have now seen the one who sees me. That is why the well was called Beer-lahai. It is still there, between Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram gave this name Ishmael to the son she had born. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore him Ishmael.
Genesis 16, please, is our territory this morning. I'd love for you to have it on your lap. And as you get it on your lap, I want to just take you back to perhaps a horrific memory. Trigger warning. Do you remember that those times when you've been in a car and it's a long journey, a really long journey? So looking out the window is not enough to distract you or the people that you're with. And so in the modern world, there's gadgetry aplenty that can help you. Just put your headphones in and listen to Spotify. Will you please borrow my headphones and listen to a podcast? Where's that iPad? What do you mean you forgot to charge it? What are we going to do? And the temperature in the car not only increases because the aircon is bust, but emotionally temperatures are increasing and you're distracted from the road. Back in my day, none of this stuff existed. We had something different. We had to focus on the word search and the mystery of the word search. We just have a pencil and a book and did that sort of stuff. But there's something else that's on the screen. Spot the difference. Do you remember that? Spot the difference. Here's one I made earlier or stole from the internet. Now I could leave it up there for the duration of this message and I would lose you. So here are the three. There's another slide coming up with some red circles. Here are the three differences that you can see now. If you got one of them, great. If you got three of them, go to the top of the class. But the point is this: attention to detail when you're reading the Bible is vital. Attention to detail is of uttermost importance when you're reading the Old Testament. The Old Testament is written, majority of it in Hebrew. It's a poorer language. There are less words to choose from. So you can rush over or drive by, sticking with our car analogy, you can drive by the detail and miss the richness, miss the subtlety, miss all sorts of information that God has placed there for our good. Just to remind you, in case you're just new around here, that God has been speaking and dealing with Abram. He's rescued him. He was a moon worshipper, and he rescued him from idolatry and said, I'm going to change the world through you. In our territory, since Genesis 11, we've been thinking about the big. God literally says to Abram, I'm going to make you not into a daddy, I'm going to make you into a big daddy. I'm not talking about a wrestler from the 80s. You're going to be a father of a great nation. I'm going to do great things through you and in you, Abraham. But this morning, I want us to look at this very important passage that could rightly have a trigger warning on it. There's an abusive relationship, we'd say in modern language. But the key to understanding what's happening here is small details in people's lives that God is going to make a big difference in. I want us to notice a slave that God notices. I want to notice an aging couple, and I want to notice a mysterious friend. Let's look at the slave together, number one. Notice the slave, verse 1. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. Now that's the second time we've heard this. That's a comment about a physical condition that we first read about the first time we met Abram and Sarai back in Genesis 11, verse 27. But not because it's just the second time that it's mentioned, but I want us to think about it differently, not just physically about barrenness. I want us to think about it emotionally. I want us to think about it psychologically. What does this mean to Sarai? Look at verse 2. In that time and culture that is different from ours, 4,000 years ago or thereabout, a woman's capital was in her family. You'll notice that from the end of verse 2. Children were a woman's significance. Children were a woman's worth. They were her identity. So if you didn't have any children, or you couldn't have any children, you had to deal with disgrace culturally. You had to deal with a sense of worthlessness. That's the psychological impact of verse 1 and verse 2. Not only that, if you put together Genesis 12, Genesis 15, God has promised Abram and Sarai to do great things in their lives. I'm going to bring salvation to the whole world through something I'm going to do in your family. You will have children. You were in your 50s, now you're in your 60s, and yet I do not want you to take initiative and things into your own hands. I want you to trust me, says God. The whole world is going to be impacted by descendants from you, Abram and Sarai. That was back in Genesis 12, and last week with Chris in Genesis 15. So on top of the shame, on top of the confusion, on top of the worthlessness that she would be feeling, I'm sure she would be processing these thoughts. I'm letting Abram down. I'm letting my people down. I wonder if somehow I'm letting God down too. And so not for the first time or the last time in the book of Genesis, we're meeting someone who's wrestling, just as we all are as Christians. Shall I, will I, am I living by faith? Will I trust the promises of God for the past, for the present, for the future, or shall I take matters into my own hands? Has God got this? Is he there? Does he care? Are his promises worth living for? Or does he need a helping hand? Verse 2. Listen to Sarai's words. The Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my maidservant. Perhaps I can build a family through her. Now this is shocking if you read it slowly, if you spot the difference. What this is telling us is what historians have told us is actually a common, a legal, an acceptable practice in that society. What's happening here is that Sarah is saying, I'm the matriarch of this family. Remember, this is not a nuclear family, this is a clan. Abraham had hundreds of people. He is a man of wealth and resources, of cultural stature. He was a man of means. He was a guy who would get things done. He had a big tribe. And so Sarah is right at the top next to him. He's the patriarch, she's the matriarch of the family. And yet she would have had many servants, many maidservants. Abraham, I'd like to give you Hagar as a secondary wife, because obviously God needs a helping hand. Verse 3, Sarai and his wife took her Egyptian maidservant Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. Now, verse 3, this word here is not what you see on the screen. When we hear the word servant or maidservant, you may have the idea of Downton Abbey in your mind, that you have a lady of the household, a lady of the manor, a lady of standing and social class, and yet 3 rungs down the ladder beneath her, she would have maidservants. Is that what we're talking about here? Is what we're talking about here someone who is employed in the household? No, it's not. What we're talking about here is somebody, Hagar, who is owned by Sarai. It's not several rungs down in the ladder. She's owned by Sarah. She's Sarah's property, Hagar. She belongs to her. And so if she can have a surrogate child through Hagar, then that child will become Sarah's property. So she's not an employee, she's owned by Sarah. Verse 2, perhaps I can build a family through her. Now hang on. This is polygamy. This means that Abraham would have more than one wife. I thought that was something I'd read about in cults, not in the Bible. Now, although polygamy was a social norm, it's worth noting nowhere in the Bible does God condone polygamy, having more than one wife, having more than one husband. Because it's against God's created order. Women always lose in polygamy. It's devastating to women and to families, as we should see. So why in the world did it happen then? Why does it tragically happen in some cults now? Well, I think in terms of then, it happened because men wanted it. Simple as that. Men wanted it to happen. And in that time, 4,000 years ago, men had all the power. Their voice was trusted, and women were oppressed, and their voice was not heard. And it was wrong then, and it's wrong now. But notice what's happening from the text again. Notice Abraham is the only one who's heard God's voice, and Abraham is the one who says, okay, verse 2, to Sarai's suggestion. Now that's the writer's way of saying subtly what he said before. Abraham's been listening to God's voice, but now an exchange happens. So today, rather than listening to God's voice, he's now listening to Sarah's voice. Same words. Because he decided to save himself. And what are the results? The results are immediate and they're painful. Verse 5, verse 6. When Hagar knew she was pregnant, Hagar began to despise her mistress. As soon as Abraham goes against God's order, disaster happens. Society, the family starts to decay. It says literally in verse 5, verse 6, Hagar said of Sarai, her mistress looked little to her. It says, in her eyes, Sarai was very small. Sarai's angry. She's not only been wrestling, as she has been through all her life, with this emotional turmoil of shame and worth in her identity as being a barren woman, where loads of other people are having fruitful wombs and fruitful families. Sarai's angry, and she's wrestling again with deep humiliation. I thought this was going to work. I thought this was going to bring me joy, but I'm experiencing more distress. I'm experiencing and feeling more shame. Verse 5, may the Lord judge between you and me. What she's saying is, I'm furious and I have a right to be. I'm not the one to blame, Abraham. You are. And what does Abraham do? Verse 6, what a coward. Your servant is in your hands. Do with her whatever you think best. And then Sarai mistreated Hagar. This means that Sarai beat her. Beat a pregnant woman. It's the same word we find in Exodus chapter 1, verse 11. It's the word that's used when the Egyptians did to the Israelite slaves what they wanted to because they weren't making bricks fast enough. So they beat them. And that's what Sarai, a woman of faith, does to Hagar. She does it so drastically, so harshly, so immediately that Sarai drives out Hagar, and so Hagar flees for her life. She flees for her life. She'll go anywhere. She flees to uncertainty. Here she is as a single parent and as a pregnant woman, and she finds herself away from resources, away from safety in the desert. And then we read verse 9, verse 10. Finally, God appears. We hear from God. Go back to your mistress, Go back to your mistress and submit to her. I knew the Bible was so oppressive to women. I knew the Bible it enables abuse. Let's take our time. Go back to your mistress and submit to her, and I will make you into a great nation. In other words, God is coming to Hagar and saying, Hagar, I'm going to give you more than you ever asked or imagined. I'm going to give you more than you ever dared to ask for or think. Hagar, I know that your life is in the desert. I know that your life is heading for a dead end. I know that you're a fugitive. I know that you're a slave. But hear my promise, and I want you to trust me afresh. Hagar, be a woman of faith. I'm going to give you the freedom you want, but you have to go back to the hard place. You have to trust me in return. Hagar, I want you to trust me. I want you, Hagar, to go back towards danger. Hagar, I want you to go back towards uncertainty. I want you to go back towards unsafety. I want you to trust me. Now, you might be thinking, and rightly so, that seems like the worst thing that anyone could say to Hagar. Go back to an abusive situation. And as we read on, not just in Genesis 16, but we see the end of the story in Genesis chapter 21, we see that Hagar did exactly what God told her to. Go back, but I will protect you. She has Ishmael, and when Sarah's jealousy reappears again in chapter 21, Sarai says to Abraham, this is chapter 21, verse 10, cast out the slave woman, get rid of her and her son. History repeats itself. Abraham unwittingly sends her out. She finds herself in the desert again. But that's the last part of the text that I'll leave you to read another point. Abraham sends her out, and this time Hagar and Ishmael once again are almost on the verge of death, and God comes through, provides for them a well, and he saves them. And Hagar is free. She's really free. Gave you a spoiler. Friends, what does that all mean? I'm going to encourage you to listen very carefully. Friends, God sometimes calls us to do things that are extremely difficult in difficult relationships, in difficult scenarios, in difficult circumstances. Yet, they're on their way to some greater blessing. At that time, Hagar could not see the whole picture. She had to take God at his word, not knowing how he was going to work it out. But she saw enough of his character to be trustworthy, to be good, to be someone that keeps his promises. God says to her, I want you to go back into an extremely difficult situation. And this is the way that I'm going to get you that blessing that I promised you. Hagar couldn't see how, but she went. She obeyed. In other words, and we've said this before, God will give you what you would have asked for if you knew everything he knows. But we don't. So we need to trust his character. We need to be wise. We need to be prayerful. We need to be discerning. But we do need to trust his character because his goodness never fails. That's the first thing that we've learned from this exploited slave. And maybe you want to talk to me about some of that later on. Please do so. Seek me out. But now let's look at the aging couple. Let's look at this aging couple. Let's start again. An aging couple. Verse 2. Abraham agreed to what Sarai said. It literally said, Abraham listened to the voice of his wife. Now we've heard that before in Genesis. It's the word for word repetition of Adam and Eve's conversation back in Genesis chapter 3 verse 17. Adam listened to the voice of his wife. In other words, Abraham is failing not because he listened to his wife, but because he's doing the same thing that Adam did. Now, what is that? Before Abraham, there are two women, Sarai, Abram, Sarai, Hagar. There are two approaches to God's blessing, one of works and one of grace. Before Abraham are two approaches to blessing. If he says, I'm going to be a man of faith, I'm going to receive and trust God's word that he has promised to me that I will have a son through Sarai, it's going to be a complete act of grace. Because she's barren, because they're both really old and gross and all that stuff as teenagers want to not think about. He's going to have to wait for a miracle. He's going to have to trust God and take God at his word. If he takes things into his own hands, if he does what Sarai suggested of having sex with Hagar, he's got to do something that he may have ability to do. It may be that Sarai is infertile and he's not. So Hagar is the way of works, but Sarai is the way of grace that Paul picks up in Galatians chapter 4. Now let's think about this topically. Every culture has a definition of barrenness. Every culture has a way of saying, unless you have this, unless you are that, unless you get for yourself this or that, then you're nothing. You're a failure. Every culture has a way of defining barrenness. Now, 4,000 years ago, it was, could you have children or not? Could you have a family or not? And that still remains the same, I believe, in traditional cultures. That's how you know that you're not barren, if you can have a big, large family. That's how you know that you're a person of significance. That's your identity. That's your social security for the future. Look at Sarai, verse 2. The Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my maidservant. Perhaps I can build a family through her. Do you know what she's saying? Sarai, in her heart, is a religious person. She believed in God. She prayed. But when push comes to shove, and it has been a decade, when she has to choose between God, staying with God, trusting God, continuing to trust his promise, or doing whatever she can in her own strength and resources to help God out and get a baby, God gets given the boot. God gets rejected and she chooses the baby over God. That's what our actions show in chapter 16. But think about us. Friends, whatever our culture is telling us, you have to have this or you're a nobody. Whenever they say that, whether it be in a film, whether it be in a piece of music, whether it be from the lips of friends, whether it's something you have assumed because of the material that you've read, there's something deeply spiritual going on in our society. Whatever our culture says, you need this family, you need this financial resources, you need to look in a certain way, you need this figure, you need this financial wealth to know that you're a worthwhile person. You need to have this CV that looks something like this. You need to have this calendar profile. Your kids need to be in all the clubs. You need to go to these resorts. You need to have these stamps on your passport, whatever it is, to know that you're a worthwhile person. Actually, there's something deeply spiritual going on. Because if you don't have those things, you're a barren person. If you don't have those things, you can hate yourselves. You can do whatever it costs, sacrifice whatever on the altar of society to get those things, to know that you're a worthwhile person. That becomes your real God. And everything else is sacrificed in its place. That becomes your real salvation. That becomes the source of significance and security, whatever it may be. Don't you see? Every culture has its definition of barrenness. This is not long ago and far away. This is bang up to date. Sarai drops the religiosity and shows the real thing that she's after. She wants to be a mum. That's what she needs to be, a significant person, because that's the message her culture told her. Friends, what are we a slave to? What are you a slave to? When you strip everything away in your quieter moments, what keeps you up at night? What are you striving for? How big would you like your business to be? How much would you like in your retirement pot so that you're happy? What are you striving for? What keeps you up at night? What are you a slave to? Or put it another way, what is the one thing that you are pursuing in your life because you think it will give you the identity that you long for? If I had that, then I'd be a someone. What's the non-negotiable in your life? Whatever that is, that's your real God. And for Sarai, it wasn't the God of the Bible. I want to be a mum. That's the story of a slave. It's the story of an aging couple. And then there's a mysterious friend. Finally, a mysterious friend. Notice again at the beginning of the Hagar story in chapter 16, she's running for her life. We meet her. She's under the thumb. She's part of a household. She becomes a mum from the patriarch, from Abram. And then verse 6, she's running for her very life to the desert. And God has not appeared in this passage. And then verse 7, in comes this mysterious friend. In comes someone, speaks to her and turns her life around. At the end of her story in Genesis chapter 21, verse 17, as I referred to earlier, she and Ishmael, they're in the desert. They're about to die of starvation. Haven't we seen this before? Of thirst, of exposure to the elements. In comes somebody and turns their life around. And the question is, who's this mysterious figure that has appeared? Who's this this person, it says in Genesis 16, the angel of the Lord. In chapter 21, the language is slightly different. It says the angel of God. Now, why is this figure so mysterious? Well, a couple of reasons. The first thing is, this person is unlike any angel in the Bible. What do I mean? Well, think about the angels in the Bible. They're there at Christmas time. You have the Annunciation of Mary. They're there at Easter time when Jesus appears in the garden and there's angels by the tomb. They're there right at the end of the Bible in the book of Revelation. They appear frequently in the book of Revelation. And each time, John wants to bow and worship the angel. And the angel says, don't worship me. You worship God. You do not worship any angels. But here in the book of Genesis, these angels are very explicit. They say, not that it's an angel of the Lord. It says, the angel of the Lord, verse 7, and also the angel of God in chapter 21. Look down at verse 10, look down at verse 11. This angel says, I will make you great. So the angel was talking like he's God. He's doing the very thing that angels never do. Yet at other times, the angel of God, the angel of the Lord says, the Lord will bless you. And other times he says, I will bless you. You see, even Hagar knows at the end, she's utterly amazed. Verse 13, Hagar says, I have now seen the one who sees me. So last week with Chris explaining Genesis 15, God shows up. There's darkness. God in his glory appears in a smoking fire pot. There's a blaze and there's dread and there's the fear of the Lord in capital letters. When God descends on Mount Sinai, the place becomes a holy mountain so that if you touch it, you die. There's thunder, there's lightning, there's an earthquake. And yet here, with this mysterious, the angel of the Lord, the God of glory comes close. The God of glory comes near. The creator of the universe is accessible. He's approachable. And you should be saying, how is that possible? Years later in Malachi chapter 3 verse 1, Malachi the prophet prophesied that the angel of the Lord would someday come to the temple. He says, the one you seek, the angel of the covenant, will come to his temple. And then you get to the book of Matthew. In Matthew 11 verse 10, Jesus quotes Malachi chapter 3 and says, that's me. I'm the one. Through me you will see and experience the very glory of God. I am the glory of God on display. And yet you can be safe. Genesis 21 verse 17, Ishmael is dying. His mother and he were thrown out of their house, thrown out of their father's house, as it were. And his life, Ishmael, is just one long experience of rejection. Talk about a hard life. He's about to die. He's near the very end of his life. And he cries out, and the angel says, Genesis 21, verse 17, the Lord has heard the cry of the boy. How do we put all this together? The creator of the universe coming close, the God who lives in unapproachable light and glory, and yet the God who draws near and hears and sees the cries of his people. Centuries later, another poor woman got another angel who came and said, you shall bear a son, and he shall be called. And when this young son was born to Mary, he was born into the world, he too, like Ishmael, experienced rejection. He came into his own, and his own received him not. This baby boy, when he grew up, is nowhere to lay his head. And at the very end of his life, Jesus, even his own father forsook him. Just like Ishmael. And yet there's a difference, you see, between Ishmael and Jesus. When Jesus was at the end of his life, he stretched out on the cross. He cried out, didn't he? He said, my God, and God did not answer him. God, his father, let him sink into the dust. Well, this is the answer, I think, friends. Abraham does not deserve to be the father of a multitude, does he? Sarah does not deserve to have a child. Hagar and Ishmael are not particularly virtuous people. Verse 12, he will be a wild donkey of a man. What a great description that is. He's not some sort of noble, worthwhile person, is he, Ishmael? But so why does God keep hearing their cries? Why will God hear your cries? Because he didn't hear Jesus' cry. Jesus Christ came, friends, and took what we deserved. He took what Abraham deserved. He took what Sarai deserved. And God did not hear the cry of his boy on the cross, so that through Jesus Christ he could hear every cry we ever utter. Does that move you? Jesus' cries were not heard by his Father, so that all our cries can be heard. The cries of darkness, the cries of sadness, the cries at the steering wheel, the cries that are just overwhelming when life is too much. And yet when we understand that, the love of God brings true freedom. We can no longer be slaves, not just for Hagar, but for us. The love of God in Jesus is a gift that when you receive it, you'll no longer oppress other people. What are you supposed to do with this inward freedom, as Daniel said to the children? Look at God. What's his concern? Here's God's concern in this passage. Hagar is an Egyptian. She's not even a Hebrew. Hagar is a woman without dignity at that time in society. She's not a man. She's a slave. She's not even a free person. Hagar and Ishmael are not even of the chosen line of Israel. We know from their story that they move off into a whole different direction, and yet God hears their cries. God loves them. God moves towards them. God is concerned about them. And here's one more amazing thing. Hagar gets so excited that God sees her. She's the first person in the Bible to name God, which is a remarkable thing. The God who sifts the stars through his hand like sand sees me. Verse 13. I have now seen the one who sees me. She was so excited. There's this just understanding of divine revelation, and she praises the God of the cosmos. Friends, how much more excited should you and I be that God doesn't just see us, he died for us. And he loves us. God doesn't just notice you. God doesn't just hear you. God doesn't tell you how important you are. You can see your value to God because he died for you. Friends, if Hagar was excited, how excited should we be? Joy should be in our hearts. We should respond in praise and prayer. And if Hagar found that really, it's what she found that really changed her. And it's that sent her back into a very, very difficult situation. That's how she could trust God, because she knew for the first time that God sees her, that God was with her, that God hears her. How much more should you and I be willing to face anything, knowing that he did that for her and knowing what he did for us? Let's pray.